Hello, this is BBC News. I'm Lukwesa, Burak. The headlines. In their first news conference since taking control in Afghanistan, Taliban leaders have said they won't let Afghanistan be used as a haven for terrorists. They also insisted that women could be actively involved in society as long as they complied with Sharia. It comes as the Taliban's political leader, Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, is reported to have flown in from Qatar to the southeastern city of Kandahar near the border with Pakistan. On the ground, the Taliban gave a public declaration of a nationwide amnesty with a call for government workers to return to their jobs without fear. And in other news, rescue work following the deadly earthquake which struck Haiti on Saturday has been hampered by heavy rains brought on by Tropical Storm Grace. More than 1,900 people are known to have died in the 7.2 magnitude quake. Well, in the last few minutes, there's been more breaking news on Afghanistan from the government here in the UK. The Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, has spoken, we understand, to the US President Joe Biden about the situation in Afghanistan. And we're also hearing that the UK government has just announced further details of a bespoke resettlement scheme for Afghan refugees. Well, our political correspondent is Nick Eardley, and he joins me now with more on all of this. So, Nick, what do we know about the promised new settlement scheme for Afghan refugees? It was promised by Dominic Raab, wasn't it?
Yeah, so this scheme is being introduced by the UK government to allow up to 20,000 Afghan refugees to come to the UK and resettle over the next few years. 5,000 in the first year, the rest expected to come after that. Now, ministers here say it will focus on what they're calling the most at risk, in particular women and girls. It is different from the scheme which had already been announced, which was for Afghans who worked with UK forces over the past 20 years and their families. We expect about 5,000 people to settle in the UK under that scheme, but this is 20,000 people separate from that. And we don't have details about how it's going to be funded just yet, but we do know that the government plans to work with local councils and devolved governments to figure out the best places for refugees to be housed over the next few years. But the message from government tonight is that they believe this scheme, which is modelled on the one which was used during the Syrian war and ultimately saw 20,000 people settle in the UK over around 5 years, ministers saying the new scheme for Afghanistan will ultimately save lives. And we've seen those pictures over the last few days that show how desperate some people are to leave Kabul and to leave the country as a whole. And the hope in the UK government is that this will be part of a wider humanitarian effort. Yes, money for humanitarian aid, but also countries who've been involved in Afghanistan over the last 20 years pledging to take significant numbers of refugees.
And I suppose that is going to come up in that emergency sitting in Parliament tomorrow, and also a conversation had between Mr Biden and Mr Johnson.
Yeah, so we think that Boris Johnson may have been the first leader that President Biden has spoken to since the situation in Afghanistan really deteriorated. They had a phone call tonight where number 10 says the Prime Minister stressed the importance of not losing the gains made in Afghanistan over the last 20 years and continuing to support people there and protecting the West against any emerging threat from terrorism. These calls are normally quite cordial, but I think there has been some surprise in the West at the pace of the US withdrawal. We know, for example, that the UK government wanted to keep some troops in Afghanistan but couldn't muster support for that amongst other NATO countries because of the lack of US infrastructure. Joe Biden, the president, has signed up to a G7 meeting, a virtual meeting of leaders in the next few days, which will discuss some of the humanitarian and refugee plans. But, you know, we are getting details of that scheme in the UK tonight. As you say, Lukwesa, Parliament is being recalled tomorrow to discuss the situation. I've got to say some of the reaction we've had from opposition parties in the UK so far suggests that some think that what the government here is announcing tonight doesn't necessarily go far enough. Both Labour and the SNP and the Liberal Democrats saying that it falls short of what's needed in this time of crisis. So I'd expect that to come up in the House of Commons tomorrow. And also, you know, those wider questions about why the UK and other NATO countries were so surprised by the speed of the Taliban advance.
OK, Nick Hurdley, you're going to be busy tomorrow. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. OK, it's time for the papers now. Well, hello and welcome to our look ahead to what the papers will be bringing us tomorrow. I'm joined this evening by the author and journalist Yasmin Alibi-Brown, and also Henry Zethman, Chief Political Correspondent at The Times. Good evening to you both. A quick look through some of those front pages. We'll start with The Telegraph, which leads with Priti Patel calling on European countries to offer sanctuary to Afghans fleeing the Taliban. The Home Secretary has said Britain will grant asylum to 20,000 refugees. Similarly, The Guardian leads with the headline that the UK is set to take in 20,000 refugees from Afghanistan. Women, children and religious minorities are set to be prioritised. On the front page of the FT, the big headline is that the Taliban vows to respect women's rights within Islam's framework. This was one of the things mentioned during the Taliban's first press conference since it took the capital, Kabul. True courage, that's the big headline on the front of the Metro. Women in Afghanistan have been holding up handwritten messages in the streets saying they want their rights and no force can ignore or stifle them. And the front page of the Daily Mail also, Deliverance and Despair, is the striking headline there. So let's begin our chat, and we're going to start with the I. Hello to you both, Henry and Yasmin. And Yasmin, I wonder if you could start us off, please. Trust us, say the Taliban. I don't know if you saw that conference, that press conference today. Did you trust them?
I don't trust them at all. But they clearly, this has been a long game for them. Long ago, I remember they said, you in the West have watches, we have time. So they've been preparing this for a very long time. Unlike the first time they were in power in Afghanistan, they've learned some smooth skills. But the I newspaper has some very good reports by Kim Sen-Gupta on how already the purges have begun. They're getting into homes of activists, and I don't trust them at all. And today's column, my column was both incredibly panicked and worried and angry about what was going to happen to the girls and women in that country now.
Yeah, we'll come to women's rights and their future in a moment. But Henry, the press conference, what went through your mind as you listened and watched it?
Well, I suppose the bewildering disconnect between the sort of the rhetoric and what we all know is both already the reality and is going to become an even more stark reality in the coming days, weeks, months and years. As Yasmin said, I mean, clearly the Taliban have learnt some public relations tricks in the last few years, and the way that they had, not just at this press conference, but in the last few days, have had spokespeople available on so many different outlets, insisting that people have very little to fear from them. But any reporting from the country and the testimonies of brave Afghans themselves makes very clear that that is not the case. I think particularly outside Kabul, because the sort of what media is left in the country is in Kabul, the eyes of the world is on Kabul, but outside, in other parts of the country, by the sounds of things, the Taliban is already starting to go into people's homes, to crack down, to enact their repression, and that is clearly what's going to happen over the coming time, whatever a slick spokesperson says at a press conference.
It's funny, isn't it? Because their defence of those actions that have been taking place is that these are thugs, and they're, it's nothing to do with the true the true ideology of the Taliban, and they're working on that and will investigate it, I think was their line, but they weren't aware of these incidents. The FT, let's turn to the FT then, Yasmin. The Taliban vows to respect women's rights within Islam's framework. How do you read into this? Because I thought Afghanistan was, well, it is an Islamic country.
Yes, and it's you know, the Sharia laws, remember, are not Quranic. They were written in the decades and epochs and centuries by men in order to suppress women. And this is true of all religions. All religions find fantastic words of God to suppress women. And I don't even understand. You see, this is the whole thing. What do they mean by Islamic? I'm a Muslim, I'm a Shia Muslim, and I come from a minority which is going to be horrendously persecuted, because we all, you know, the people I belong to have already been persecuted before. The Islam we follow is anathema to them, so whose book are they going to follow? And women's rights, if they really mean the Quranic rights, women do have extraordinary rights, not enough. There are still some terrible bits in it, but, you know, right to a fulfilling marriage, right to divorce, to have her own money, to make independent choices. They're not going to give women that. Their Islamic code book is very different from mine and that of many other people.
So why are they reading different words then? Just as a non-Muslim, and as I think for many people around the world who are trying to understand this, when you hear within Sharia is the law, is Islamic law. So when you hear within the limits of Sharia, you know, we're left thinking, well, what is that law? What does it mean? What do the words say?
Yes, and each, you know, if you go to Saudi Arabia, their interpretation of Sharia law, which I insist, I think people must remember this, were man-made laws, and I mean man-made, okay? And so they create these codifications. In Iran, there's a separate set of codifications, and almost kind of hoodwink the population that this is the word of God. God did not want young children hanged because they were activists. It's just a way of justifying what they're going to be doing. And I think, you know, I'm so worried that people are already beginning to say, oh, well, they're not going to be that nasty after all. They say they're going to be really nice. Beware of their kind words and good words. You know, it's dark days lie ahead, dark days.
Well, Henry, we're still talking about women's rights, but let's turn to the front page of the Metro and what many will see as incredible bravery for some Afghan women to take to the streets.
Yeah, it's courage beyond imagination for many of us, certainly me. And, you know, it is those photos that I think we'll see lots of, you know, resurfacing time and time again as we hear more about what will inevitably be the Taliban's repression of women, again, whatever they're saying now. And, you know, one of the things I found is interviews with several women activists in Afghanistan saying that they're going to stay, they're going to fight for their rights, they're going to stand up for their principles, which is incredibly brave. But certainly, and, you know, we'll come on to talk about the refugee element to this, but, you know, certainly some women will entirely understandably not be so brave and want to get out of Afghanistan and try and come to a country where they will be treated with more respect than they're going to be treated by the Taliban. And this photo is incredibly powerful, but the UK and other countries also need to open their doors to people who want to get out rather than stand in the face of the Taliban protesting. And that's going to be something we're talking about in the coming days, I'm sure.
Yeah, we'll come to the refugees in a minute, but I just want to get your final thoughts on this, Henry. In this press conference, we heard about women working in the media. It was rather confusing. Again, you can work, but according to Sharia law, you're not allowed to talk or broadcast anything against the nation, but we want you to criticise us because we want to learn our mistakes. As a journalist, what did you make of that?
Well, again, time will tell. I mean, one thing that was striking in that press conference, by the way, was that they took questions. In fact, I think the question that yielded that answer came from a female journalist, female Afghan journalist. But, you know, again, it is one thing to say such words in a press conference when there's still a relatively large military presence from other countries in Afghanistan. It will be another thing for them to act up to those words in the next few months, not to mention years. And I think very few analysts of the country that I've heard from believe that this really is sort of Taliban 2.0. It's just a slicker version of what we know of the Taliban.
Yasmin, you took both those boxes, journalist and female. What did you make of that?
Well, again, you know, I agree with Henry. You know, they've just got very good, better at slick delivery. But one of the most impressive things, I must mention this, is that several of the women who finally were elected to parliament in Afghanistan stayed and say things like, we're going to be with our people, while so many of the men, including the president, bolted. It just is a disgrace that these men ran away, leaving these women who are so committed to their kind of vocation, if you like. Again, shows their bravery and commitment.
OK, so talking of commitment, let's turn to actually, there's 3 papers covering this story. We've got the Express we're going to start off with, the Mirror also, and the Daily Telegraph. But this new announcement from the UK government, Henry, that we will, over the long term, be taking 20,000 refugees.
Yeah, so this is what you were just discussing with Nick before we came on. So the UK government is announcing tonight the establishment of a new, what they call bespoke Afghan resettlement scheme. So this is separate to the questions we've been talking about for some months about interpreters or other Afghans who've assisted British forces over the last 2 decades. This is Afghan refugees, people fleeing the Taliban, in particular women, girls, and religious and other minorities. And they say that under this scheme, there will be safe and legal passage for up to 20,000 Afghans. In the first year of the scheme, 5,000 they want to bring to the UK. Now, putting those numbers on the scheme is something that very few other countries have done so far. But the real question, or the most immediate question, is what that sort of safe passage will look like. I mean, this is modelled on the Syrian refugee scheme that the UK government set up in 2014. But then, when they set up that scheme, there were already refugee camps on various borders of Syria. This time, it's much less clear, or at this point, I should say, it's much less clear how, and indeed whether, many people will make it out of Afghanistan. So the numbers are one thing, but actually enabling the reality of that phrase "safe passage" is going to be something much more complicated, and it's still at this stage quite unclear how that's going to happen.
So when you turn to the Daily Mirror, Yasmin, that was exactly what struck me. When I read the line, "will be offered a route to set up home in the UK permanently," I thought, well, what route? You know, look at that face on the front page of the Mirror and you think, how are women and children going to safely travel by themselves before they reach UK borders? Is this what it means? Lots of questions still.
Yes, and I think our government is doing actually exactly what this new Taliban government is doing the PR. You know, they've said they're not going to assist anybody to leave. Taliban will not let people freely leave and become refugees. That is, you know, simply not going to happen. And 20,000 people over 5 years is a miserable number. And to read the Express, a really ridiculous headline, that we're big-hearted, helped create this situation. Albania has reacted with better, genuine, authentic emotion. Uganda is taking refugees, okay, because the US has asked them to, with more generosity than we have or will. And it really does make me feel ashamed to be British when I read this. Sorry.
OK. Well, we're going to end there, but you're right about Uganda. I mean, they already receive an incredible amount of refugees, one of the highest on the African continent. Back again at 11:30 for another edition. But for now, Yasmin Alibi-Brown and Henry Zeffman, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. And thank you for watching the paper review. You can see more on those stories on the website and those front pages, as well as deeper analysis of all the developments on Afghanistan, bbc.com. Back again with another press review at 11:30. Until then, goodbye.